ADHD Rewired, episode 481. This is the podcast for those of us with really good intentions and a slightly wandering attention. I'm Eric Tivers. I'm a licensed clinical social worker by training and a coach by design. I'm your host, and I have ADHD. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community. We are wired for connection, and you are not alone. Go to ADHDrewired.com to learn how you can join us in our free and secret Facebook group. Get additional resources for every episode, including links to any resources we mention on today's show. You can support us on Patreon, sign up for our email newsletter. You can request podcast postcards to distribute to your clients and support groups. Learn all about our award-winning coaching and accountability groups. You can co-work with us in our Adult Study Hall virtual membership community. You can do all of these things by going to our website at ADHDrewired.com. We know that starting is the hardest part, so let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD Rewired. Today's guest is Abby Wilson. Abby runs a global facilitation, mediation, and coaching practice from her beloved home of Pittsburg, Pennsylvania. She uses methods from the design field, A.K.A. design thinking, which is what we'll be talking about today, to help individuals navigate career change and organizations to lead with empathy, reframe challenges, and generate ideas. Her ADHD diagnosis 8 years ago at the age of 35 is one of those before and after life moments that I'm sure so many of us can relate to. And she is thrilled to be connecting the dots between design thinking, her life's work for the last 12 years, and her naturally curly mind. That's a new one, curly mind. I haven't heard that before.
I can thank my mother for that.
As I was my brain tries to read a little bit ahead as I'm reading. And I was like, wait, was I supposed to say curious mind? No, I'm just going to read it as it is, curly mind. So Abby's curly mind has lived in 6 countries. She has birthed 1 child who she adores. And in parentheses, she wrote in 0, she doesn't. Worked in many governments and has enough letters after her name for a competitive Scrabble game. I think I'm going to just leave the rest for our conversation. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So we first actually met at the 2022 Chat Conference.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited to have you on. You actually just recently joined our coaching groups. So let's kind of dive into it. What is design thinking?
Yeah. So design thinking is a way of thinking. It's not just a clever name, but it's a way of thinking and working and being in the world that is informed by what designers do every day. So that could be a graphic designer, a person who designs a light bulb, or a dishwasher or a car. But at its core, design thinking is about having empathy, so caring about people, working in a collaborative way, lots of other people, diverse pools of thought and input, asking really, really good questions, and perhaps most importantly, working iteratively. So instead of going into a cave and working on something for a long time without showing it to anybody, we train people to make small experiments, show them to people outside your team, yourself, whatever. It doesn't need to be anything formal or fancy. Get feedback and iterate. So yesterday, Eric, I heard you describe yourself as a tinkerer. So I guarantee you are a design thinker.
Well, that's great. When we were talking about all of that, I was like, oh, that sounds like what we do in coaching, because it's all about designing experiments and just observing the feedback or the outcomes for it, and just keep improving. Mm-hmm. So when you're working with companies and sort of teaching them how to do the sort of iterative process. Mm-hmm. So my first question is, what kind of roadblocks do you come up against?
I would say the biggest roadblocks we come up against are that organizations want their people to be creative, but they don't necessarily know how to do that. And they also don't always know that sometimes creativity is messy. Sometimes having a great idea, actually always having a great idea means having a lot of bad ones, right? So one of the kind of traditional rules of brainstorming is there are no bad ideas. I can say from personal experience, there are plenty of bad ideas. It's our job as design thinkers to have the ideas, right? Give them air, and then quickly and collaboratively figure out which ones should we pursue and how do we figure that out. So being a creative organization takes a lot of work, and it also involves risk taking.
So, one of the things that I'm wondering about too is, like, I think it's easy to understand how design thinking can be really important and valuable for organizations. But I'm also thinking about this through the lens of just life,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how we kind of problem solve through this kind of idea of design thinking. So, like, whatever the challenge that we're experiencing is, how would you take a design thinking approach? So, I'll give you an example. So
Great.
today, so I am much better at going to the gym when on the mornings when I am dropping my son off at school.
Okay.
On those mornings where he's not with me, he's with my ex-wife, and it's just up to me to get out of the house early enough to do that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Lately, I've been kind of like 50-50 on it. Like I
Mm-hmm.
get just like been getting sucked into different things at the house, and all the while thinking, I need to not do this right now. And yet,
Mm-hmm.
like, we all have experienced that. We're like, we know what we're doing. This is not actually what we want to be doing. And yet, we feel like there's this like invisible force field that's keeping us sort of stuck.
Mm-hmm.
So let's take a design thinking sort of approach to
Yeah.
figuring this one out. Because I should have played pickleball this morning and I didn't.
Oh, yeah. I understand you love pickleball. I've actually
I
never
love
played.
pickleball.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So, first tip I would give you from a design thinking perspective is follow the emotion. When you talked about pickleball, your face lit up. And for those of you who are just listening, you can hear it when somebody's smiling, and Eric was smiling ear to ear. What do you do at the gym?
I typically play pickleball. That's where I go. Yeah.
Okay. So that's where you go. So the most basic framework for a design process is there are kind of four pieces to it. This came from the UK Design Council. I can send you links if you want to, for anybody who wants to learn more. But the first piece of this is the discovery phase, right? So before we figure out how we're going to solve your problem, what I would want to do is observe your morning, right? What's happening? Where do you have your shoes, your bag? What are you interacting with? What happened the night before? In the absence of me being able to be there or someone being able to be there, you can be your own design researcher, right? So journaling, jot these things down. I'm sure you do this a lot with your coaching groups when you're habit tracking and all that good stuff, right? So we want to be really, really curious about our experiences if we're observing our own lives. One simple way to do this, if anybody's interested, is to use a method called rose, thorn, bud. So you could reflect on the night before, let's say on these days when you don't have you're not dropping your son off, and the morning of when you miss the gym. What are the things that went well that morning? Those are your roses. I would say if you're capturing these notes, it can be very useful to do one per sticky note, because we're going to then sort of move things around, but it does not have to involve sticky notes. And I'm sensitive to people with all abilities. So capture your roses, good things, thorns, barriers, problems, difficulties, right? Could be anything. And buds, these might be areas of opportunity. So I do a rose, thorn, bud every single day with my son and husband when we sit around the dinner table and reflect on our own days. It's a great tool for conversation as well. But for research, this is a really simple way to not just be kind of endlessly curious, but to start to add this additional layer of meaning, right? So once we understand what are the roses, thorns, and buds in your home life on the days when you don't make it to the gym, we would probably then move to the next phase of this process, which is a very loose framework and that people spend a lot of time discussing in a bunch of different ways. But the next phase here would be to define, right? So a lot of what designers train themselves to do very well is figure out if they're solving the right problem. So instead of you just saying, okay, I need a reminder in front of my, couch for when I leave the house, That's the solution I'm going to go after. What problem am I trying to solve? Is it maybe that when I don't have a kid in the house, I'm staying up later at night doing work or something else? Well, then a sticky note might not be the right solution to the right problem, right? But we can only define our challenges effectively if we've got good data and observations. So I would then sort of figure out, okay, what's the problem we really want to solve? We know Eric wants to play pickleball. It brings him joy. It's good for him in a bunch of different ways. Let's sort of define that based on what we have seen. The third piece of this would be called develop or design. So this is the moment where we develop a lot of potential solutions. And this is something where I think people with ADHD, at least I'll speak from my own experience, comes really easy, right? I can generate ideas like just water out of a tap, no problem ever, any time of day, full stop. Not all of those are good ideas, and I definitely can't pursue all of them. So before we deliver, which is the last sort of element of this framework from the UK Design Council, we need to figure out what we're gonna test, right? So in your situation, without going too deep into the kind of problem that you brought to the table, that's what we would want to do. So we would want to say, okay, what are all the different ways we could get Eric to pickleball on days when he's not dropping his son off for school? P.S. I didn't say get Eric to the gym because maybe there's some pickup pickleball game in a park somewhere that is not your gym. I have no idea, right? But
it's more of the issue of like leaving the house. Like just it's a momentum piece.
So there you go. So that is a very specific kind of problem definition that we could, through this process, that we could do. So some of the ways I sometimes explain this to people, a warm up I often run in the workshops I teach, where I first ask people to draw a vase. Okay. And let's imagine that we are a company. We want to make more money. We're in the flower industry. So everybody draw a vase. Well, guaranteed, whether you view yourself as good at drawing or not, I'm going to get a bunch of vases. People have done exactly what I asked them to do. Things start to get much more interesting if we change our question to how might we help people experience flowers, or how might people experience flowers, right? Might involve a vase. It might not. And it's going to get even more interesting if we ask, how might people experience flowers? And we actually go and talk to a bunch of people about flowers. Maybe some people have allergies, right? Maybe they don't want to be close to flowers because it's going to make them sneeze. Maybe people don't like cut flowers because it's not environmentally sustainable. Or you'd be surprised how often I hear people saying how awful the smell is of flowers in a vase because they've forgotten to get rid of them or compost them or whatever, right? So these methods help us reframe. That's probably the biggest thing that they help us do, both with some cognitive techniques, but also by the really kind of simple invitation to be super curious about people and how they interact with their world.
It sounds too, and this is something that we in our coaching meetings with my other coaches, we are regularly asking ourselves, are we solving for the right problem right now? Like that's kind of sounds like what we're talking about.
Yeah. One of my colleagues, Tyson, who is an amazing instructor, former Coast Guard pilot, says we use these methods to avoid making a great landing at the wrong airport, right? So you might have a beautiful solution, and if that solution lands in Dallas, but I'm trying to go to San Jose, it doesn't really matter how beautiful it is, right? Because I'm in the wrong place.
Huh. So trying to think from a sort of this divergent thinking, which is something that many of us with ADHD sort of connect with, this idea that one idea spawns 4 ideas and those spawn 20 other ideas. And,
Yeah.
Part of the I think where people get stuck becomes a working memory issue,
Yes.
because like they forget the original initial thought, right? And so they may get really interested and get a sort of a dopamine feedback loop about coming up with all these other ideas that are sort of spawning from the previous ones, but it was too much of a sidetrack from the original. So what do you do, like personally, to help you with this?
So I'm going to show you a picture. I know this is a podcast, but I'll send you an image. If you want to include it, you can. This is a picture I drew for my presentation at CHAD this fall in November. So this is the ADHD brain sieve, right? This is what I feel like a lot of times when I'm not managing my ADHD. I've got a million ideas going on in my brain, and it's as though there is just an opening in the back of my head and everything is falling out, right? Some of it is good ideas. Some of it is things I worry about and then they go away. So that's good. What I personally do is give my brain a parking lot with paper. I manage most of my life digitally, but for some of the things I'm about to tell you about, I do this all on good old-fashioned paper. I have something called a what's on your radar poster. I made it. It looks like a radar diagram. So you've got a circle in the center that can fit around 6 to 8 sticky notes, a second circle out of that can fit more sticky notes, and a third circle around that can fit even more sticky notes. Every Friday, I look at my radar diagram has 4 categories. Okay. One category. So think of it as segments, right? If you looked at one segment or quadrant of that radar, you're going to have a little pie piece in the center and then move out. So one chunk of that is the people that I love. I'm married. I have a husband. I have a kid. I have friends, family, etc. Number 2 is my mental and physical health. Number 3 is my work life. So all the different consulting projects and things that I do with Steam Creative. And number 4 is what I call adulting. So that's the stuff that I hate: taxes, bills. I spent 2 hours yesterday updating my phone number with a bank. And that is the kind of stuff that I actually had to do it, but it just fills me with so many emotions, right? But it's got to get done. So every Friday I look at my 4 quadrants, take off stuff that I have done, which gives me a beautiful dopamine rush, and things that are on the outside of the radar, right? They might have been 3rd tier. Some of them I can move to the center if I need to, or maybe there are completely new things that have come up. So for me, it's very useful to have a place where I can put ideas I have, might not be actionable right now because I'm afraid I'm going to lose them, right? So there is a mediator colleague of mine, and we've been talking for a couple of years about building a course together. I've got that sticky note on my radar. It's not active right now, but I know it's there. And so it gives me some comfort.
So that radar allows you to capture the ideas and allow you to be able to see, is this something that like you just don't want to lose the idea, but is not actually something you're taking action on right now, and you just keep revisiting this?
Yes. And so the prioritization is number 1, right? There's only enough room in the center ring for maximum 2 items per quadrant. Doesn't include things I do every day, right? But there's maximum 2 items per thing. But if I were just going to do that, I would feel anxious and sad about losing the stuff that's not, but like, what's going to happen to those little babies? I don't want to lose that baby. That baby, it's a beautiful idea, right? And there might come a time when it comes to life. So this particular tool gives me the chance to give it a home.
All right. Well, we need to pause right there, and we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, let's dive in even more into some ideas around design thinking. So we will be right back. Our guest today is Abby Wilson, owner of Creative Steam. You could find her at abbywilson.com. We'll be right back. Hello, ADHD ear buddies. Support for this podcast comes from ARC. ARC is ADHD Rewired Coaching. Learn more about our intensive 10-week coaching program and accountability groups at coachingrewired.com. Hey, are you in search of a supportive space where you can acquire practical skills, develop emotional acceptance, to go from analysis paralysis to actionably adaptive, and engage with others who genuinely understand the experiences of living with ADHD? Then that's where coaching comes in. And our summer season of coaching groups is coming up fast, starting on July 13th. If you have questions or want more information, then join us for our summer registration kickoff event this week on Thursday, May 4th at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. And the earlier you register, the more you can save with our early bird pricing. Join one of ADHD Rewired coaches, one of our other coaches sections, and you can get $500 off when you join
one of their sessions. To join us, head on over to coachingrewired.com to add your name to our interest list and start your registration process. Registration is by invitation only, so once you've added your name at coachingrewired.com, instructions will be emailed to you for what you'll need to complete before you can join us. Once you're done, don't forget to hit that last step, which is RSVP, so you can join us for our summer registration kickoff event this week, Thursday, May 4th at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. Spaces will be very limited this summer, so don't wait. So if you are ready to go from managing your ADHD to really thriving with your ADHD and want to work alongside other adults with ADHD who just get it, then don't wait. Go to coachingrewired.com to get started on your pre-registration process and take advantage of our early bird pricing for sessions led by coaches Kristen Martz or Brian Etler. That's coachingrewired.com. We can't wait to meet you.
All right, we are back. All right, so the first part of this episode, we were talking about just some of the frameworks of the design thinking. You talked about this method from the UK, this 4-part method you first discover. You have the rose, thorn, bud. I just want to make sure my notes are accurate.
Yep.
Then you have to do the develop and design approach, and then you actually deliver on what it is that that's the execution, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Then right before the break, you were talking about this sort of radar.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of people, because we do a lot of work in coaching on prioritization, and I think a lot of people struggle with the what to do first,
Yeah.
and how to say no, and I think sometimes people feel saying no means never. But what do you think about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, prioritization is critical, whether you have ADHD or not, right? Organizations desperately need to do this. The important thing about prioritization is, and I can relate to this, and I'll be very honest, because I have at different points in my life and career struggled with the execution of ideas I have, right? Over time, I start to get nervous that, well, I shouldn't have these ideas because I'm afraid I'm not going to actually execute on them. I'm not going to actually follow through. I'm not going to actually deliver, right? And that's very stressful. What happens over time when you behave that way is it undermines your creative confidence, and you stop having ideas or sharing them with other people because you're afraid that it's just going to be another big idea that doesn't go anywhere. So when I teach people creative methods, I make sure we separate the activity of generating a bunch of ideas from the activity of prioritizing those ideas. When we try to mush them together, then we just have stinky ideas because we're already thinking about, well, this doesn't work, that won't work, this won't work for that reason, et cetera, et cetera. So we've got to pair those things together. When I have a bunch of ideas and I'm trying to prioritize them, my most favorite method is a method called importance difficulty matrix. Okay. I can send you resources about all of these. The sweet spot for this method is around 12 ideas. So you might have gone through some process before to get to that number. But the first thing I'm going to do is rank those 12 ideas by how important they are. My husband and I bought an old home recently. There are just an unbelievable number of projects we could do in this house, right? It reminds me of that house in It's a Wonderful Life with every time you went up the stairs, the knob on the banister came off, right? We love it, but it's very old. But we can't do all of them at the same time. No can do. So we actually have one active as a family. First thing we do is rank them importance. In my house situation, its impact on our ability to be comfortable and safe in our home. So that's number one. We assign each idea relative importance. So if you were to imagine, each idea is going to have a number between 1 and 12. So let's just say, for the purposes of this conversation, that 12 is most important and 1 is least important. Fine. There are no ties. So we've got that. Only then, once we have determined the importance, do we then assess the difficulty. So we have to separate those questions. Otherwise, people will try to kind of game the activity. At the end of this, you're going to have a sort of scatter plot because maybe idea 1, which is the least important, is super easy. So, okay, I might sort of like flip that switch and fix that problem. But if number one is also the hardest, guess what? Not doing that, at least not now. Lego uses this method too, and they often call that stuff that's like not impactful and really hard, not now. We don't have to like kill our darlings, as you'll hear writers say sometimes, or performers, but we definitely shouldn't start there. Where we want to start is obviously if you are in this kind of dream scenario where you have something that is both powerful and really easy to fix, then you should stop whatever you're doing and like go do that thing.
It's like what they refer to in the book, The One Thing, is that first domino. What's the sort of smallest, easiest thing that we can do that's going to have the biggest impact down the line?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. So that is my go-to prioritization tool for sure. But it only works if you have like a smaller number.
What kinds of questions do you ask yourself when you're trying to identify sort of a ranked order of importance?
I think having a really clear conversation with yourself or your team about what you want to see in the future is the most important thing you can do. I'll give you a brief example. Years ago, when I worked in public health, we were trying to prevent childhood lead exposure. Everybody agrees this is a good thing. We don't want children to be exposed to lead. It harms them. There have been plenty of stories in the news about this. But when we got to our importance difficulty matrix, we realized that some of the participants defined importance by raw number of children who are exposed to this neurotoxin, whereas other people defined importance as how we protect the most vulnerable kids who are exposed to the most lead. That is a very, very different calculation, okay? And so if you're talking about your health, to take it back to the personal, health is pretty general. So what are we talking about? Are we talking about changes in your resting heart rate? Are we talking about your overall feeling of well-being? Being as specific as possible about sort of what you want to see is a really, really helpful way to define the importance conversation. Now, difficulty is a different set of questions, and that's really anything that makes something hard. That could be time, that could be money, that could be, cognitive activation required, whatever the case may be. But those are two very different conversations.
It's interesting. One of the things that we actually do in the coaching groups is we connect it with some of our time tracking, where we have people not only predict how long they think the task will take them, but also the perceived difficulty and how much executive function they think it's going to take, and then to actually rate afterwards, like how hard was it actually, and where's your executive function after the fact, and this is something we've started doing kind of recently, actually, and it's been really cool to sort of see all these ahas that people are having around, like, oh, like I thought this thing was going to be so hard, and it actually was like not as hard as I thought, or like I thought this was just going to completely drain me, and it actually was kind of felt good getting it done, so I actually feel more energized, and so that's so it's going way beyond just the idea of how long will this thing take me,
Yeah.
but it's helping us really get more nuanced in understanding what sort of activates us, what drains us, and what energizes us, which I think is so critically important for us.
Yeah, I received a financial email late in the day yesterday and had this intense reaction because like 5 p.m. for me is the witching hour. Like my Adderall is wearing down. I'm exhausted. I've been working really hard all day. My executive function reserves are depleted. And, math is not my party time. And I was just like, like, what am I going to do? I just sort of observed my reaction and realized that actually there was some very, very simple math that I could do to deal with this. So it's true. The amount of energy that we might invest sort of worrying about something in the future is massive. And I do think design thinking, and I have observed this in a bunch of different environments, part of what these methods help us do is lower the emotional temperature of things that can be difficult. Right. So we might be gathering feedback about a sort of new team formation. But even if I'm reflecting with, my partner about how things are going in the household, when we capture them as roses, thorns, and buds, and we're actually writing them down, it makes the conversation a little bit more relaxed. because the things that we have captured become another participant in the conversation. And it's not just two emotional beings kind of going back and forth.
Right, the things that we have captured have become a participant in the conversation. Say more about that.
Well, so if you and I were disagreeing about something, let's say you really wanted to go out for a brunch and I really wanted to eat at home.
Okay.
There's all sorts of reasons why that might be the case. We have this discussion and we'll figure it out. But if it ended up being sort of tricky enough for us to try and sort of use some of these methods, if you were to write down the reasons why, let's say your last brunch experience. Well, it was, the food was delightful. I ran into somebody I knew. Thorn's was a little more expensive than I expected. And Buds, maybe research the Yelp reviews in advance to sort of figure out how much I'm going to spend. Maybe my Rose's totally different about, eating out, etc. When we've written that stuff down, you and I are not just talking to each other. We're looking at these things that we've written down. It's like triangulation, right? And so I see this in conflict mediation as well, whether it's a family situation, employment, whatever. When it's appropriate and people can actually write down some of what is on their mind, not just journaling, not just private, but actually write it down to be shared with someone else. In my experience, and I'm not speaking as a scientific researcher, but it does seem to lower the emotional temperature, which is why, again, really simple tools. But for me, like I've been called the sticky note lady in literally every job I've ever had. And I think part of why that works for me without even knowing is it helps me manage some of the emotions I experience as far as my own ADHD is concerned. And the Sharpie is important because it makes what we write down easier for other people to read. And the thickness of the Sharpie makes it impossible for us to write a gazillion things.
Oh, I love
so
that.
we've got to get to the point. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm definitely when there are things that I use for when I'm planning out a bigger idea, and I'll do something pretty similar to that. The Sharpie idea is critical because, like, for me, just seeing a pen written on sticky note, like my brain doesn't register it. And I think a lot of people kind of experience that. So why does this all matter?
I think for me, the biggest thing I want to say to your listeners is that a lot of the things your brain does naturally are in-demand skills from CEOs in the Fortune 500. And I don't know what you do for a living. I don't know if you're happy in your work or if you're looking for a change. And I'm not saying design thinking is going to be the solution to all of your problems. I do think everybody that listens should find some free resources online to just expose yourself to these methods. The Stanford D School has some great free stuff. I primarily use the Luma Institute's system because it has just 36 methods, so it's very manageable for me. But these skills and methods and stories will feel so right to so many of you, because design thinking helps us harness our natural curiosity and creativity to bring new things into the world. And I will tell you, I've never encountered as many people with ADHD who are comfortable disclosing their neurodivergence as I have in design thinking workshops I've ran over the years. So I feel like some of us are naturally attracted to this. So that was kind of a long-winded answer, but I feel like I just want to give you all a pat on the back, because the novelty that your brains seek out, the way you identify interesting patterns and combine things in interesting ways and ask weird and sometimes irreverent questions, those are behaviors that are at the core of creativity. And organizations all over the world are realizing that we're not running assembly lines anymore and we need to be more creative. And this is a really, really, really in-demand skill. So that's, I think, why it matters. And on the sort of more deficit management side of things, there are a lot of these methods that really help kind of manage your brain and give your ideas a parking lot.
We're going to be right back with Abby Wilson. And when we come back, I want to talk to you about how do we translate these ideas to the key people in our lives. Maybe that's a boss or a family member, so we can really leverage these natural strengths that we have. We will be right back.
Adult study hall. What is that? Do I only have to study? What if I need to tidy a room or break down boxes for recycling? What if I'm stuck on a project, need to organize paperwork, or clean out my closet? What if I need to put away winter gear? Well, you can bring all of that and more and work with others to help keep you engaged with your most dreaded or boring tasks in our ADHD-friendly body doubling community at adultstudyhall.com. It's not just limited to studying, of course, but if that's what you need to do, of course, you can do that too. From our weekly guided sessions, also known as Adult Study Hall Plus or ASH Plus, to our 24/7 drop-in room, there are plenty of ways that you can utilize the power of real-time accountability to get your to-dos from due to done. It's only $19.99 a month, and it's free to try for the first week. Find all of our themed and guided events and learn more at adultstudyhall.com. Come work with us. The website again is adultstudyhall.com. Support for this podcast comes from you, our listeners. If you've been able to add new tools to your ADHD toolbox from tuning in to this show, then consider subscribing if you haven't already. I actually just checked some of the analytics through Apple Podcasts, and it looks like about 25% of listeners aren't actually subscribed to the podcast. So make sure you hit that little plus button if you're listening to Apple Podcasts so you follow the podcast and get new episodes automatically sent to you in your podcast player. And you can join us every second Tuesday of the month for our live Q&A. Go to ADHDrewired.com/events to get registered. Bring your ADHD related questions and get some tips and tricks and join in on the fun. That's ADHDrewired.com to find everything ADHD Rewired, including our podcast archives, show notes, co-working community, other shows, upcoming events, and coaching groups. One more time, that's ADHDrewired.com. All right, we are back with Abby Wilson. All right, Abby, so you were kind of talking a bit before about how, when I asked you why it matters, that these skills are just really important for, for the workplace. I think sometimes our, whether you want to call it our unique abilities, our quirkiness, or our whatever it is, are underappreciated or misunderstood. How do we help those in our lives, whether it's a boss, a partner, a friend, a group that maybe you're involved with? How do we help them understand the value of design thinking?
I think those people, assuming their brains are wired differently than ours, often see value in design thinking for different reasons. So part of what I observe is that there's a translation back and forth. So for example, I teach a lot of alternatives to traditional brainstorming. Many of the elements of those methods are built on psychology around how the brain generates new ideas. We can actually train people to combine different things to come up with something new. That may come more naturally to some people than others. So for people for whom that convergent thinking, where you're deciding, narrowing down, prioritizing, where that comes more naturally, it can be really exciting to learn that creativity is not some sort of mysterious quality that only belongs to people who wear black turtlenecks, right? It can be taught and practiced and cultivated. For those of us, when we've got kind of all over the place ideas, for example, and I'm very wary of generalizing, and I know everyone experiences this very differently, and I'm not naive about this being an exclusively strengths-based experience, right? I've shed many, many tears because of my ADHD over the years. But for those of us for whom, I'll just speak for myself, generating a bunch of ideas is super easy. These methods can actually help us showcase that value to other people, because now I can say, hey, guess what, boss? I had 59 ideas for how we bring in new customers, and I decided that 12 of them are actually interesting because I brought in a couple of other people and we looked through them. And then we had a conversation about how we would assess the impact of those ideas and how difficult they are to bring to life. And here's what we came up with. So we're taking a little bit of time to not just show the, hey, look at this crazy idea stuff, but also the methods are just like scaffolding, tools, support, right? To say, yeah, hey, I've got all these crazy ideas and it's not as hard as I might be afraid of to narrow these down, right? And so that's, I don't know if that answers your question, but it can help.
I could see the value in sort of help, like communicating to others how we got to what, like the ideas that we got to. I also can see,
Mhm.
because I experienced this myself, is sometimes it happens so fast that like sometimes I don't even know how I came up with the idea that I got to, but I feel it so strongly, but I can't in a
Yeah.
logical way backtrack it well enough to communicate it. So what would you recommend there?
Well, in that situation, I don't think you need to sort of try to be an idea detective and figure out like what things combined with what to get you to where you were. But I do think in the workplace, I'm thinking about companies and organizations, but this could be true in a variety of contexts. The best thing to do to build support for your ideas is to validate them with research. So you've got some crazy idea that happened quickly. You don't know where it came from. It's still just an idea. Show it to someone, get some real feedback. Don't wait too long so that you are madly in love with it and are going to be really, really hurt when somebody says, you know what, that might not actually work because of X, right? A colleague of mine years ago started talking about this thing called the time love continuum, which is the longer we spend with an idea, the more we love it, right? The problem about the time love continuum is the longer we've spent with an idea, the more we love it. And if we haven't shown it to anybody else, the harder it is for us to receive feedback, right? It becomes that much more painful. It's also harder for people to give you feedback because if you show me something that you've clearly spent an insane amount of work on, it's very polished, complete, perfect. I'm not going to want to hurt your feelings. And it seems to me like, oh, well, they're going to go do this thing. So, great. And we'll find out what happens after you do it. So, yeah, show it to people. Like, don't be afraid. Get some feedback.
It's like we all need to have our own like inner circle idea council, so we can like bounce all of our ideas off each other. Because it's I mean the number of other business ideas around ADHD Rewire that I come up with is there's a lot of them, and I've learned through just my life experience, and I was kind of getting tired of having panic attacks because I was taking on too much. So like I say no to lots and lots and lots of things. Um, and part of when there's an idea that just kind of won't leave me alone, that's when I start to share that
Yeah.
like with my team to see kind of what they think about that particular idea. So I want to change.
Can I recommend a book before?
Yes.
I was thinking of this. There is a children's book called "What Do You Do with an Idea?" And if anyone has heard of this book, awesome. And if you haven't, it's beautiful.
Who's the
It's
author?
by Kobe Yamada, Yamada. And it's about just nurturing and loving ideas and how they sort of like bug you and keep coming back. And so I thought a lot about that book in the context of my own design thinking work and ADHD, because if it's a really good idea, you will nurture it and it will kind of follow you around. And so for me, that's very comforting because I don't have to be scared that I'm going to lose it. I write it down. It goes on the radar, but there are ways to nurture it. So yeah, it's a beautiful book.
Thanks for that. So we have a few minutes left here, and I am very curious as to you shared with me, I think in our I think it was in our initial conversation, that you also do some improv on stage.
Yes, it's been a little while. I love, love, love improv. So do you do any?
Not in any like real realm. I mean, I think I'm funny. I make myself laugh.
I think you're hilarious. So definitely improvisational theater, for those of you who've never seen it, is theater that's completely made up on the spot by a group of actors who typically have built a lot of trust with one another. So when I was in college, I participated in an improv musical. This was an amazing process because we spent like 3 or 4 months improvising for hours a day. So we would get suggestions, mitten, Antarctica, pizza, right? Whatever. And you sort of weave these stories over 10, 20, 30 minutes, depends on, can run out of steam. And then writers would take some of our ideas and actually write songs and scenes. There's a great improv scene in Pittsburgh. And the most important part of improv for anyone who's never heard of it before is this idea of yes and. So if we're on stage and I throw there's no props. So if I throw a fictional ball to you and I say, okay, Eric, here's the basketball. And you say, well, that's not a basketball. It's a grapefruit. Well, that's a big wah, wah, right? Yeah, totally. But if you were like, yeah, and here's our other teammate who's ready for a layup. So you're not only accepting the idea that is presented to you, but you're adding on it in some way. My son and I practice this all the time. So now if I'm bored of our sort of dinosaur fantasy landscape, he says, Mom, you're not yes-anding me. But it's really about supporting and building each other. And before we go out on stage, I haven't really been performing live since COVID, but before we go on stage, we always pat each other's backs and say, I've got your back. So one of the most beautiful things about improvisational theater is that the other probably most important rule after yes and is make your players look good. If you make the person that's on stage with you look good, it's going to be a beautiful, awesome experience. Nobody wants to watch actors cut each other down on stage. The reason why it looks like, how are you making this up? You have to have scripted this. The reason it looks that way is because they're trusting each other, they're yes-anding each other, and they're making each other look good. And those are life rules that if you can hold those to heart, they're really powerful.
Yeah, just thinking about how applying those in so many different scenarios, how powerful that is, from family to team building to whatever it is that we are doing. If we are all there to help sort of lift each other up and support what we are doing. And when I play music with my son, who's 11 years old, neurodivergent, and it's kind of like watching me learn to play piano when I was a kid, because he has the ear for it and he just kind of figures it out. So we do a lot of improvisation together. That's one of the things that I'm regularly trying to help him with is I'm playing this because I'm trying to accentuate what you're playing, but you need to be listening just as much to what I'm doing as I'm listening to what you're doing. And it's funny, he'll sometimes be like, I can hear what I'm playing. I'm doing that because you were doing this. I was like, awesome. So it's great. It's a lot of fun.
That's beautiful.
Any final thoughts that you want to leave our listeners with? And this has been such a fantastic conversation. I've probably 2 more hours worth of questions, but time is a thing.
Time is a thing. Time is an accordion. I always felt weird about teaching people design methods when I don't consider myself a designer. I was trained as an anthropologist. I went to law school, all sorts of wacky things in my background. But the definition of design I would share with all of your listeners was crafted by a man named Herb Simon, who created artificial intelligence, but is a very human-centered designer and no longer with us. But he said, everyone designs who devises courses of action aimed at changing existing situations into preferred. So any time in your day, anyone, when you see something around you and you think, okay, that's what that is. And I bet I could make it to the gym. I bet I could make it safer for people to cross the street. I bet I could make it easier for neurodivergent employees to feel good on this team. You are acting like a designer. And so there's room enough in that tent for all of us. And it's a beautiful way of thinking and living and being. And it's really changed my life. So, yeah.
Abby Wilson, thank you so much. Abby, again, is the owner of Steam Creative. Her website is Abby Wilson. That's ABBY, Wilson.com. And we're going to get a bunch of the resources that we talked about today on the show notes for this episode. So just go to ADHDrewired.com and find this episode, and you'll find all the links and resources that we mentioned here today. Abby, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was really, really wonderful.
It was fun. Thanks.
This is Eric Tivers. Thank you for listening, and congratulations for making it to the end. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community focused on learning, growing, and connection. The website is ADHDrewired.com. You can find time-stamped summaries and additional resources for each episode. Apply to join our free and secret Facebook community. Learn more about our award-winning intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups. Join the Adult Study Hall virtual co-working membership community. Find all the other podcasts on the ADHD Rewired Podcast Network. Sign up for my email newsletter to get exclusive content that you won't hear anywhere else. And use the search tool to find episodes on specific topics. You can do all of this at ADHDrewired.com. While you're there, click on the Patreon button. If you are a regular listener, consider making a monthly contribution by becoming a patron. If you are able to financially support my work, it would mean a lot. This show is free to you, the listener, but it's not free to produce. Plus, patrons get cool perks like ad-free episodes and access to recordings of coaching calls, and $25 a month patrons can join me once a month for a group coaching call. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Tivers. You can like our Facebook page at facebook.com/ADHD Rewired. If you're a coach, therapist, or related professional, connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Eric Tivers. Subscribe to ADHD Rewired on YouTube to see selective interviews and other videos I've made. Podcasts change lives. You can make a difference in someone's life by spreading the word about this podcast. Mention it in your online communities on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, or wherever you hang out online. And be sure to share it with your friends, family, your therapists, your coaches, doctors, siblings, parents. And if you, your coach, therapist, doctor, or ADHD support group leader would like a pack of podcast postcards to hand out, you can request those at the website, ADHDrewired.com. If you are a member of CHAD, ADA, or any other ADHD support group, please be sure to tell them about this show and all the shows on the ADHD Rewired Podcast Network. You can even show them how to download it on their phone. And if you really loved this particular episode, please hit share on your podcast player. I'm only one person, and I do count on you to help spread this message. One of the biggest things that you can do to support this podcast and help other people discover it is to leave an honest rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other app that supports reviews. And don't forget to hit subscribe so new episodes are automatically pushed to your favorite podcast app. Looking for more ways to listen and learn? Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at Audible by going to audibletrial.com/ADHD Rewired. Here is my list of must-listen-to audiobooks updated July 2021. Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. Attached by Amir Levin and Rachel Heller. Atomic Habits by James Clear. The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. Crucial Conversations by Carrie Patterson. The Coaching Habit by Michael Stainer. The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Rest by Alex Sujong Kim Pang. The 5-Second Rule by Mel Robbins. Make It Stick. The Science of Successful Learning by Peter Brown. The Productivity Project by Chris Bailey. Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics by Dan Harris. Change Your Questions, Change Your Life by Marilee G. Adams. I always recommend to my coaches and admin that they read that book. The One Thing by Gary Keller, a required reading for all of our coaching group members. Procrastinate on Purpose by Rory Baden. The 4 Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. And if you're looking for something a little bit more magical, I have fallen in love with the Harry Potter series, and the narrator, Jim Dale, is amazing. And of course, if you haven't yet boarded the Brene Brown bus, all of her stuff is great, starting with Gifts of Imperfection, Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, and The Power of Vulnerability. And if you're an entrepreneur or leader, be sure to check out her book, Dare to Lead. Do you have something that you would like to share? Click on the podcast tab at ADHD Rewired. Click the button to be a guest at the top of the page and schedule a 15-minute interview. This is Eric Tivers, reminding you to keep learning, growing, and connecting. Self-care is not selfish. No matter what you get done or don't get done, you are still enough. And no matter how hard it feels, we can do hard things. And we don't need to do them in the hardest way possible. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next week.